My name is Franziska. I am with the Ethereum Foundation. I work there for like 3-ish years now, and I do many things, but among others, and actually for the longest time there, I am part of the Solidity team. I'm doing ecosystem stuff there mostly, but literally bridging between users, the Solidity core team, doing project management and just community stuff. And today I'm going to share some insights from the Solidity developer survey with you, and also add my own insights and opinions and things to it. So hopefully, even if you have read the report, you won't be too bored. I'm only going to share a selection of insights because the actual study was kind of long. But before I do that, I hope that all of you, because this is an Ethereum meetup, are aware of what Solidity is, but I still want to get everybody on board. So Solidity is a programming language that you use for developing smart contracts on Ethereum. And you can learn everything about it by visiting our language portal at soliditylang.org. And I think yesterday or a couple of days ago, made the screenshot from DeFi Llama. Of course, DeFi is not the only application on Ethereum, so it's not 100% representative, but I just want to give you a rough idea. Solidity is currently the most used language, and I think this picture shows it quite good. There are, of course, also other smart contract languages that you can use in Ethereum, for example, Viper, which I think currently is the second most used one. And yeah, there's then also what we heard before, right? ZK, specific languages, etc., etc. But today we're talking about Solidity. And before I start with the insights of the actual survey, I kind of want to frame this correctly. So even though you might think, oh my God, Solidity has been initiated in 2014 and must be such an old language and not evolving at all anymore, in smart contract or generally in programming languages, being initiated in 2014 is incredibly young. And as an example or as a comparison, I just put Rust there. I think Rust is a language that everybody thinks is rather modern, young, new, and it has been initiated as a personal project in 2006. And yeah, Solidity has been started in 2014. So I think we can agree on that there's still a lot of stuff that is evolving, because while the Ethereum network is evolving and the EVM is evolving and all of the dApps and security stuff is evolving, the language evolves with it. And that brings us into quite the unique situation that on the one hand, we already have a lot of users, as I mentioned in the first slide, but we still want to innovate and iterate and of course have to keep moving. So currently we aim for non-breaking releases every month-ish and for breaking releases every year. But I also put the dates of our last breaking release there. It has been longer than a year, and it also has been longer than a month that we did our non-breaking release. So the pace is definitely slowing down, but there is still change there. And now you could ask, okay, so what is the change based on? The change is, of course, based on external factors. I don't know, the all core devs people deciding to add a new opcode or change an opcode or do things that then in the end also influence the programming language. But it is, of course, also based on we want to improve the user development experience. We want to listen to user feedback. Of course, it's very hard to circulate the survey because I have to give a few disclaimers. The survey is currently only distributed in English. And that, of course, gives a certain framing to the whole thing. We do not translate it so far, and it's circulated over our channels, and then usually also the developer tools, the Ethereum-specific developer environments help us circulate it as well. So, of course, there can be a lot of bias if you don't really reach the right developer communities. This year, I really try to, for example, also reach the Chinese communities, which are very segregated from the Western communities in terms of they have their own social networks that maybe I'm not even active in as a Solidity ecosystem person. And I think since this year, we received quite a few Chinese responses. I think we did a good job in that. But yeah, USA is still on rank 1. With 241 responses coming from the USA, followed by India, and followed by France, and then a newcomer, Nigeria, on rank 4, and Germany followed on rank 5. This was roughly the same in the years before, but actually Nigeria has followed up quite a few ranks. Then we also ask, of course, what's your native language? The most spoken language is English, but actually closely followed by Indian languages, Spanish, and then French. I clustered a couple of languages into clusters because really everybody respond, of course, with their home language or their mother tongue, but for Indian languages, Chinese languages, and I think also Iranian languages, which you cannot see here right now, I put them into clusters so that they are really representative in the pie. And then we also ask, do you like to read the Solidity documentation in English or in your native language? Which I think is an interesting question when looking at documentation translations. And yeah, the big majority of people that we asked this, so, oh, by the way, I didn't mention this in the beginning, but this little N number here in the corner displays how many people have responded to the respective question, because even though we had 1.4K responses overall, of course, depending on the question, we had varying amounts of answers, and this question was only asked to people whose native language is not English. So basically, the majority of them said, no, it's fine to read this in English. The people that did state, no, I would prefer my native language. There's this tiny breakdown here. I'm not sure if you can read it, but basically Spanish is on top, followed by Indian languages, followed by Russian and French. And so if we are doing this community translation efforts, I think it would be good to focus on those languages. But again, the disclaimer, maybe we haven't reached the right communities because the survey was only in English after all. So this is not the main goal of the survey, it's just nice to know. So next up, we have a few insights into the developer profile, which are more generic questions that don't really touch on Solidity development stuff yet. The first question in there is, how many years have you coded professionally as part of your work in any language? And this is kind of a nice distribution until we reach the 15 plus years. So I think next year I'm gonna split the 15 plus years up into more chunks so that we have like a better representation of how long these guys have been coding. But we see that the majority of them are like, I would say, fairly new with 1 to 2 years of experience, but then also we have a big chunk of people who have been coding 3 to 5 years or even 6 to 10 years in general. Then we ask, what are your touch points with Solidity? So do you do this as a hobby? Do you do this as your main job? Or are you like a manager of a development team? And here it was multiple choice. So whenever you see the little R, it means the N means number of respondents. The R means number of responses. And if it's multiple choice, people obviously just choose multiple things if they like. And yeah, like in previous years, Solidity is really like heavily used for personal projects, but also heavily used at work. And this year, Solidity marked again the most used programming language for the survey audience. I think this is an interesting thing to check on whether you are reaching the right audience. We would want them to be using mostly Solidity, because otherwise the questions we ask about language design, etc., later on in the process would maybe not bring us the correct responses because they are maybe not power users. But in this way we know, okay, yes, they are using Solidity heavily, so hopefully they are power users. And Solidity was also amongst the most popular languages, scoring 18.8%. But I also have the graphs for you, so let's look at it in more detail. First, which programming language do you use the most? I think this one really shows we have a big JavaScript/TypeScript community here, because those two together are roughly 45%. But yeah, the other big chunk is Solidity, and then also a fairly big amount of Python users. In terms of favorite programming languages, it's a little bit more diverse, it's a little bit more distributed. There we have Solidity on rank 1 again, followed by JavaScript, followed by Python, TypeScript and Rust, all quite popular. And yeah, we always ask, which operating system do you use predominantly? This is kind of interesting because in the last years it's moved more towards Mac OS, and the people came from Linux, I'd say, because Linux has decreased its share and Mac OS has increased its share, while Windows was usually quite stable in these 30-ish%. Then we deep dive into the Solidity user profile, where we ask like more specific questions about the Solidity usage. But first we want to know, okay, so how do people self-rate themselves? Do they think they are Solidity pros, or do they think they are beginners just getting started? And actually, many people really think that they are Solidity experts with a self-rating of 7 or higher out of 10. And 4.6% of all respondents even rated themselves a 10 out of 10. But also 70% of those have been using Solidity for 2 or 3 years or even longer. So it is at least somewhat believable. Here we see the whole distribution. So here's this like 58 people saying they are experts, but then really a big chunk of them here in the 6 to 8 range. And if we compare this now to how long have you been using Solidity for, it creates like an interesting picture, right? We have the majority of people using Solidity for like 1 to 2 years, but we also have quite a significant chunk in the 2 to 3 to 3+ years. And now going back to the initial statement that Solidity is a fairly young language, if you have been using Solidity for more than 3 years, you are already not too bad. And I think also in the next years, I will split that up further into more granular chunks as we grow older as a language. But also a really big amount of newbies with under 3 months or 3 to 6 months of Solidity experience. Then we also want to know, okay, so how difficult is it to get started with Solidity? Luckily, it seems like it's not too difficult, because currently, in terms of how long did you take to feel productive with Solidity, we have over 20% actually saying less than a month. I think that's pretty great. But then the majority of people saying less than half a year. I think that's something that we can work with. And also, if you read the full report, I give like more insights into the people, for example, who said, I don't feel productive yet. If you correlate that with how long have they been using Solidity and you find out less than 3 months, then it's not so bad. We also, again, want to check, are they power users or not? So how often do you use Solidity? And there we see 41% of the people who have answered that survey use Solidity daily, which I think is quite intense. And the other 37.3% use it weekly. So I'm seeing that we basically reach roughly the right target audience. And then we go deeper into the usage specifics. So which editor do you use? Which Ethereum development environment do you use? In terms of editors, it's quite crazy. 82% roughly of all people use VS Code, followed by Vim and IntelliJ, but really low rates compared to VS Code. Here's the full graph. Definitely VS Code dominance. Followed by the Ethereum development environments. If you are not so much into Solidity development, you can of course use a normal editor, but then as soon as you want more features that are more Ethereum specific and want help in terms of debugging, deploying, etc., you may want to use like an Ethereum specific development environment, and there Hardhat is definitely the most popular one currently, with roughly 75% of all respondents using it. Remix is also quite popular with 42%. And then a really interesting, Foundry increased its share from, compared to 2021 to 2022, from 1.6% to 30%. So they are rather new. It's a rewrite of DevTools. And here we see the entire breakdown. In this case, again, it was a multiple choice question, because sometimes you want to be using different environments depending on your use case. So for example, you want to really quickly deploy something and just check whether it works, you probably use Remix. But if you want to do something more professional, maybe you use, I don't know, Foundry or Hardhat. Also, throughout the years, we have really seen that the truffle usage is steadily decreasing. But again, disclaimer, a few years ago, we only had roughly 200 respondents, so I don't think that's statistically relevant. Maybe we need to reach out more to the Truffle users again. Then we also ask which Solidity versions do you currently actively use. That is an important question for us to double check whether people are really upgrading to the latest breaking release and then also to the latest releases respectively. Yes, we do not encourage at all to use anything that is lower than 0.8 because there are regular bug fixes, there are new features, and please, please, please upgrade your contracts and do not use old versions anymore. This was again multiple choice, so probably a few people have contracts still on older versions because those have been audited or those are already deployed or I don't know why, but please, if you start a new project, use the latest version of Solidity. And also, I always put this like kind of funny thing, and I don't know why people really tackle it, but I don't know which version I'm using. I really hope everybody knows which version they are using, but 74 people either felt funny or are beginners. Now another interesting question, since we are moving towards the L2 world and also have, of course, a lot of other EVM-compatible chains out there, we wanted to know, what do you actually use Solidity for? Do you use it for Ethereum mainnet and Ethereum testnets, or do you use Solidity contracts for completely other, I don't know, EVM-compatible chains that we don't know of or we aren't aware of? And here we see that roughly 53% do use Solidity outside of Ethereum, and 46.5% only deploy to Ethereum mainnets and testnets. And the people who said yes to, we of course asked the follow-up questions. So which networks do you deploy to? That was again a free text question, so I tried to correlate the answers as best as possible. Definitely on rank 1 here is currently Polygon, or some people also still wrote Matic network. So I think they meant, I mean, I'm interpreting here, but because they only wrote Polygon or Matic, I think what they mean is this regular chain that they have, which is actually, for me personally, the least exciting one, but that's okay. Yeah, then there's also, of course, a couple of roll-ups. Some people also said stuff like most other EVM chains or all layer 2s, so I clustered that in as well. And then in the later section of that chapter, we ask very specific questions just to get a feel of, do people really understand what we are doing there, and are they using the new features or not? And this one, there were a couple of questions, but I only picked the interesting ones for this talk. This one I thought was rather interesting. So we asked, do you use via IR? And before I talk more about it, who of you knows what via IR is? Raise your hands. Yay, you don't know? Okay. So via IR stands for via intermediate representation. It is the new codegen of the Solidity compiler, which goes via the intermediate representation UL. And this has been experimental for forever and has been marked non-experimental also kind of a longish time ago. And this is a good reality check for us. Almost 71% said, what's via AR? They have literally no clue. So that is a good information for me and the whole team. Okay, we do need to spread the word more about it. We do need to explain it more. It's not just self-explanatory, right? And I mean, luckily they were roughly 19% saying yes, they do, and a couple of people saying no. You can read all about like the benefits that this brings on our blog as well, but basically it helps you avoid stack too deep in many cases, and compilation times are currently a little bit worse than in the old codegen, but we are working on this, and it really brings, a lot of benefits, so please check it out. Then we also asked, do you publish the metadata of your contract? Gladly, at least more than 50% said yes, they do, but still a shocking 28% say no, and the rest say, what is that? So I think also there we can do a little bit of more educational work to really bring everybody on board. And if you want to find out more about metadata, I really recommend you to checking out the project Sourcify and the Sourcify playground at playground.sourcify.dev. And if you're interested into human readable transactions and joining a working group there, I give a shout out to Khan, who's also in the audience. Please go talk to him later. And he's also one of the maintainers of Sourcify, decentralized source code verification and metadata stuff. Next to other EVM networks, of course, we also want to find out, do people use other smart contract languages as well? And as we know, some ZK stuff doesn't work with Solidity yet, or the transpiler isn't optimal, or maybe people use other languages for other things. So of course we want to find out, do you use other smart contract languages? Half of our respondents actually only use Solidity, and the second most used smart contract language after that is Heintl, which is the intermediate representation of Solidity, followed by Viper, followed by Cairo, that's the language from Starknet that was also mentioned before, followed by Huff and Sway and Rust, etc. So yeah, I think that's also useful and interesting to know. But again, we were of course targeting Solidity users, so it is not representative to an entire ecosystem. Maybe if Viper would also do a Solidity, a Viper developer survey, we would find out the other way around. Now let's go a little bit more into details on the Solidity developer experience and how devs feel about it. Luckily, the majority of 75% believe that the Solidity developer experience improved in the last year, and more than 25% also even think that it was a big improvement compared to the year before. So that is for us kind of a happy sign. Here's the full graph, and we see, yes, of course, there's a difference between like big improvement, some improvement, and slight improvement. Some people also say, I don't know. Now one could check in the data again, are those people that have only been using Solidity for 3 months or less, or are those people that have been around for forever and don't have an opinion? 0.9% are of the opinion it got worse. So if one wants to analyze the data, we can basically filter those out and see what they wrote about the language, because we also had free text fields on what's your favorite feature, what's your most dreaded thing about Solidity, what's your biggest pain point, and then we can really find out what they dislike about the development. And going deeper into these developer experience, one thing that is crucial for us to know is, do you encounter the same or multiple issues multiple times? And if so, which ones? Because that would be bad, right? Luckily, this share has decreased compared to previous surveys. So 60% of the respondents now say, no, I don't really encounter the same problems multiple times. But the people that do encounter things multiple times, for them, it's mostly around debugging issues, stack to deep errors that will haunt us for forever, probably, but used via AR, and bytecode size limitations. And yep, here's the graph for that again. And another graph about the multiple issues. I talked about that. So I think last but not least, language design and upcoming features. In this section, depending on the year, we either present new features that we are thinking about implementing and asking for prioritization of those, or asking for feedback on those, or generally ask what is the most anticipated feature for you, what are you currently missing in the language. And we also asked, would you like Solidity to become less or more restrictive or explicit? Because there's obviously lots of opinions on that. And the majority is leaning towards staying as is or becoming a little bit more restrictive or explicit. And then in terms of developer community, we ask a couple of questions like, do you interact with other devs? Do you know what are the channels? Do you know how to stay up to date, etc.? I didn't want to bore you with those, but I think this here is an interesting last one to show. Basically, we give a couple of statements as, like, again, a kind of feelings check-in with the developer community and see if they agree or disagree to those statements. And I would say the summary of this, in case you cannot read it, the first one says, I feel welcome in the Solidity developer community. The second one says, I am confident with the work of the Solidity core team. The third one says, I feel welcome to contribute to Solidity. The fourth one says, the Solidity team understands my needs as a developer. And the last one says, the options how to contribute ideas or feedback to Solidity are clear to me. To summarize, the dark blue one means agree and then basically gets less, and yellow means I don't know. People are somewhat confident in the work the Solidity core team does. And yes, and they also feel somewhat welcome, but they don't really know how to contribute, or they don't feel welcome to contribute. And they are also not sure whether the Solidity team understands their needs as a developer, but they still feel somewhat confident. So, of course, we as a team then have to analyze what does it mean. But the one thing that I think I can fix today, or at least tackle to fix, is the options on how to contribute ideas to Solidity are clear to me. So bear with me. Oh, first, here's the full report. I usually write a blog post on all of the findings of the developer survey. And of course, in the spirit of open source, we also open source all of the raw data as well as all of the graphs. So feel free to take a photo or scan these codes if you want to learn more. But now, very quick excursus into the Solidity language design process and how you can contribute. Yay! So all of what we do, I mean, goes without saying, but is open source, and your feedback and contributions are welcome. And basically, it has several steps, right? So I'm just going to walk you extremely quickly through the several steps of how a new feature or language change goes into Solidity usually. Usually starts with a proposal, then some sort of community discussion, core team discussion, followed by like a more detailed implementation discussion and implementation details to then somebody actually implementing it. Yeah, and you can follow this process along even if you don't want to contribute to it, because everything is transparent on our GitHub. And you can also even follow the development conversations along as well, because even those are transparent on our matrix or GitHub. It's bridged. And if you want to learn more about how this process works, it's also documented in our docs. So you can go on docs.soliditylang.org. In the contributing section, there is basically one section on the language design process and on our team calls and how to contribute PRs, all that stuff. And then basically, if you ever have a change request, feature idea, feature request, whatever for Solidity, or even only feedback, I'd say the best place to get started is the Solidity forum at forum.soliditylang.org. There's different categories. I took a screenshot here of the language design category, so people proposing and discussing new features when they are still in this idea mode, so to say. If it then gets a little bit more precise, then those ideas from the forum are turned into GitHub issues and then are discussed in the GitHub issues. So basically, as soon as it gets more tangible, either we ask you to create a GitHub issue, or there is already a GitHub issue, or the conversation somehow moves to GitHub. And there you can also follow along by just checking the labels of the open issues. There's one label called language design, and that is basically the one where all of the future language design stuff gets discussed. And then you can also follow the status of those issues once they are basically in the implementation mode in our different GitHub project boards. So there's one project board which is called Solidity Focus Board, where you can really see, are things already being worked on? Are they still in to-do, or are they already in progress, or are they in the review stage? What is the team currently doing? And if you do not find your things there and do not know whether this is even currently a priority or not for the team, I recommend you checking out our high-level priorities, because this is also a revamped roadmap we have created for 2023, which basically shows, our development priorities and feature priorities for this year. And feel free to check it out. It's called Solidity Roadmap Project on GitHub. And that's it. Thank you very much, and let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you. I remember that in the survey was a question regarding which feature would you like to add into the programming language. Is it possible to get a clustered overview if there are some special features that are wished by the majority of the community?
Yes, I also summarized this in the report, but I don't have it open right now. Let me quickly go there. Sorry, I don't know all of the stuff by heart.
Okay.
But it must be somewhere here.
But it is part of the report, yes? So I can look it up later. Okay.
Yeah, it's definitely part of the report. I'm just checking if I find it quickly. It's a long report. Here, I think here we have favorite feature, most dreaded, most anticipated. Yeah. Oh, yeah, I remember. So basically, some of the most mentioned anticipated features, and again, that was free text, so it was more difficult to cluster, but lots of stuff got mentioned around support for fractional numbers, which were either called decimals, fixed point types, floating points. Also, some people mentioned generics, better optimization, getting rid of stack to deep, the obvious stuff, better debugging, and so on.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you. I'd like to know what were the channels that you used to reach the developers and for how long you guys keep the
survey open?
Yeah.
Yeah. In terms of channels, I would say the major channel where I announce everything is the Solidity Twitter account. But I also mirror everything to Mastodon, where we also have a Solidity account. And then posting it in the Matrix channels, in different channels like the Ethereum security Telegram chat, everywhere where I can find like core developers, and then also sharing it with these people that are like Solidity influencers, so to say, from Austin Griffith to Patrick Collins, and all of them then also shared it. Then we've had different IDEs also implement a pop-up. I think Remix had a little tile, Heart had implemented a pop-up, so sharing it with the tools so that they can also share it in their things, and also got shared in Weekend Ethereum newsletter. So I think that were roughly the channels. I don't know how much further it got from there. In terms of how long it was open, we did open it in December and it stayed open until beginning of January. So we usually take care it's longer than a month. I think this time it was maybe 1.5 months or something.
Awesome, thank you.
Do you have any information on the organizational size where these developers are part of? So it would be interesting to know if they're like smaller teams or bigger organizations taking part of this survey. Is there any information on that?
On the size of the teams, unfortunately not. In the demographics section, we do ask the question, which industry do they work on? But nothing really on the team size or on the organization size.
Okay, and the second one would be like, when people ask you about learning about Solidity, where do you send them to? Which is the best source for newcomers?
So first of all, there's also a section on that in our documentation, in the resources section. But honestly, I sometimes also post on Twitter what's like the best new things to send people to, because I feel like my default is still Crypto Zombies. But of course now they are cool courses, right? There's like, depending on the type of learning person you are, Patrick Collins has made this Solidity course, which goes, I think, 24 hours on YouTube, which is insane, probably good for people that are YouTube-based learners. There is this whole biddle-giddle around Austin Griffith. I think he's also doing very good tutorials, which you can follow along. So yeah, really depends on the type of learner you are. And in terms of reading up and finding those tutorials, I can highly recommend the Ethereum.org developer portal. So Ethereum.org, and then just click on developer and you find tutorials, you find ways how to get started, etc.
Thank you.